A Warner Brothers executive told Clint Eastwood, "Your talent. We manage talent. Know your place." Clint didn't argue. He stood up in the middle of the sentence and left the building. What he constructed over the next 5 decades turned that executive into a cautionary tale they still whisper about in studio conference rooms. Burbank, California. Winter of 1968. The San Fernando Valley fog hung low over the Warner Brothers lot, giving the Spanish colonial buildings a dreamlike quality that contrasted sharply with the brutal reality unfolding inside Conference Room C. Clint Eastwood sat at one end of a mahogany table that could seat 20 but held only 6. His agent occupied the chair to his left. His business manager sat to his right. Across from them were 3 studio executives, led by a man named David Kellerman, the senior vice president of production who'd spent 2 decades climbing Warner Brothers' corporate ladder. Kellerman was old Hollywood incarnate, gray suit, silver cufflinks, a smile that never reached his eyes. He'd survived 3 studio regime changes by understanding one fundamental truth. Talent was replaceable, but the system was eternal. Stars rose and fell. Studio power remained. The meeting concerned Clint's next American project. He'd returned from Europe as an international phenomenon, transformed by Sergio Leone's spaghetti westerns from a television actor into a global icon. Warner Brothers wanted him badly. They just didn't want to give him anything that mattered. $400,000, Kellerman said, pushing a contract across the polished wood. Plus points on the back end if we hit certain numbers. That's triple what you made in Spain eating dust for Leone. Clint didn't touch the contract. His eyes stayed fixed on Kellerman's face, reading the man the way a hunter reads terrain. "I want involvement in the creative process," Clint said. His voice was quiet, unhurried, the same voice that had made The Man with No Name feel dangerous. Director approval, casting consultation, input on final cut. Kellerman's smile flickered, then reset itself. "Clint, listen. We appreciate your enthusiasm for the craft. Really, we do. But there's a reason movies are made the way they're made. Professionals handle production decisions. Actors handle performance. Everyone stays where they belong, and the machine runs smoothly." "I've seen the machine run differently," Clint said. "In Italy, Leone controlled everything. His vision, his decisions, his final product. The films worked." "Italian cinema," Kellerman waved dismissively. "Low budgets, no oversight, cowboys and spaghetti. This is the American studio system. We've perfected the process over 40 years. We know what audiences want. We know how to deliver it. What we need from you is exactly what made you famous. Show up, squint into the camera, and let professionals handle the complicated work." Clint's expression didn't change. "What if I want to direct eventually?" The question seemed to amuse Kellerman genuinely. He exchanged glances with the other executives, who chuckled on cue. "Actors don't direct," Kellerman said, as if explaining arithmetic to a child. "Acting and directing are completely different disciplines. You wouldn't ask a surgeon to design the hospital. You wouldn't ask a pilot to build the airplane. You do what you're trained for, what you're good at, and you leave the rest to people who understand it. I understand more than you think. I'm sure you believe that." Kellerman leaned forward, his tone shifting from patronizing to something harder. "Let me be direct with you, Clint, because I respect your talent too much to waste time with diplomatic language. This industry has rules, hierarchies. Actors who try to accumulate creative power beyond their station end up making expensive mistakes with other people's money. Studios that allow it get burned. So, we don't allow it. Simple as that." Clint's agent cleared his throat. "Perhaps we could discuss a middle ground. Creative consultation rather than approval." "There is no middle ground," Kellerman interrupted. "Warner Brothers makes films. Clint Eastwood stars in them. That's the arrangement. Take it or leave it." The room went silent. Somewhere outside, a golf cart hummed past the window. A mockingbird sang from a palm tree near the commissary. Clint stood up. Kellerman's eyebrows rose. Where are you going? We're negotiating. No, Clint said calmly. You're dictating. There's a difference. Sit down and let's work this out like professionals. I am a professional. That's why I'm leaving. Kellerman's face hardened. Walk out that door and you're walking away from the biggest paycheck of your career. You're walking away from Warner Brothers, one of the most powerful studios in the world. You think the other majors will treat you differently? This is how Hollywood operates. This is how it's always operated. Clint was already moving toward the exit. I'll make sure everyone knows you're impossible to work with, Kellerman called after him. Every studio in town will hear that Clint Eastwood has delusions about running productions. You'll be doing dinner theater in 6 months. Clint paused at the door, turned slightly. That same quiet voice, that same measured delivery. Thanks for clarifying everything, he said. Now I know exactly what I need to build. Then he was gone. The story spread through the industry before sunset. Most executives agreed Kellerman had handled it correctly. Actors needed boundaries. Stars who got too much power became liabilities. Clint Eastwood would learn his lesson when the phone stopped ringing. Except the phone didn't stop ringing. And Clint didn't learn the lesson anyone expected. Within weeks, he'd established Malpaso Productions. The name came from a creek near Carmel, California, where a warning sign read, Malpaso Spanish for bad step, dangerous crossing. Hollywood insiders saw it as an admission that Clint was making a mistake. Clint saw it differently. Sometimes the dangerous path was the only one worth taking. Malpaso wasn't a vanity project. It was a strategy. Instead of waiting for studios to grant him creative authority, Clint would produce his own films, maintain control, and then negotiate distribution from a position of strength. He'd be the one setting terms, not accepting them. His first production was the same Western Warner Brothers had tried to lock him into, Hang 'Em High. Clint produced it independently through Malpaso, cast it according to his vision, and then sold the distribution rights to United Artists, pointedly not to Warner Brothers. The film cost under $2 million. It earned over $11 million domestically. Clint made more money as producer star than he would have made in 5 years of following David Kellerman's orders. The success proved the model worked, so Clint repeated it. Coogan's Bluff, Where Eagles Dare, Paint Your Wagon, 2 Mules for Sister Sarah. Each film produced through Malpaso. Each film preserving Clint's creative input. Each film profitable. Then came 1971, and Clint made the move everyone said would destroy him. He directed. Play Misty for Me cost less than $1 million to produce. It earned over $10 million. Critics who dismissed Clint as a limited screen presence suddenly noticed his visual sophistication, his efficient pacing, his psychological insight. The man who wasn't supposed to understand production had created a superior product. That same year, Dirty Harry emerged as one of the decade's defining films. Warner Brothers distributed it, but only because they came to Clint begging for participation. The power dynamic had completely reversed. The studio that had tried to control him now needed his blessing to be involved in his projects. Through the 1,970 seconds, Malpaso Productions became an industry phenomenon. High Plains Drifter, The Outlaw Hosey Wales, The Enforcer, Every Which Way But Loose. Each film directed or produced by the actor who supposedly couldn't handle creative responsibility. Each film commercially successful. Several of them culturally transformative. Meanwhile, David Kellerman's trajectory moved in precisely the opposite direction. The projects he championed at Warner Brothers underperformed consistently. The talent he'd signed with confidence departed for better opportunities elsewhere. And every time someone mentioned Clint Eastwood's latest success, Kellerman had to absorb the knowledge that he'd driven away a generational talent because he couldn't imagine an actor transcending the role he'd assigned them. By 1979, Kellerman was quietly removed from Warner Brothers. The official explanation involved restructuring. The actual reason was that his judgment had proven catastrophically poor, and Clint Eastwood's ongoing triumph served as constant evidence. The vindication continued for decades. Clint directed more than 20 films through Malpaso. He won Academy Awards for Unforgiven in 1992, standing on that stage accepting honors for a film that existed only because he'd refused to accept limitations. He won again for Million Dollar Baby in 2004. He kept working, kept directing, kept proving that the man who'd walked out of that conference room understood the business better than the men who'd tried to keep him small. In 2008, an interviewer asked Clint about the legendary meeting at Warner Brothers. His response was brief, characteristically understated. They wanted me to stay in a box. I built my own house instead. But people who were present in that conference room remember more details. They remember how Kellerman's face flushed when Clint stood up. They remember the threats delivered as Clint walked toward the door. They remember the absolute certainty in Kellerman's voice that Clint would return, humbled and compliant, within 60 days. They remember being wrong about everything. The conference room where that meeting occurred still exists on the Warner Brothers lot. According to studio legend, when young executives get too confident about their ability to control talent, senior colleagues quietly tell them about David Kellerman, about the man who told Clint Eastwood to know his place, about what happened to his career when Clint chose to define his own place instead. Malpaso Productions still operates today. It's produced over 50 films across more than half a century. It gave Clint Eastwood complete creative autonomy for his entire career. It exists because one man refused to accept that his potential was limited to what others could imagine for him. David Kellerman, when he's remembered at all, serves as a warning about the cost of arrogance. The executive who had a legendary talent sitting across his conference table. The executive who chose to lecture that talent about knowing his role. The executive who watched helplessly as that talent built an empire specifically designed to prove him wrong. The revenge wasn't personal. It wasn't loud or vindictive. It was simply success. 5 decades of success. Billions of dollars in box office, Academy Awards, and critical acclaim. Cultural impact that shaped how an entire generation thought about Westerns, about justice, about American masculinity, all because one man heard an executive say, "Actors follow orders," and decided he wasn't that kind of actor. Clint Eastwood didn't destroy David Kellerman directly. He didn't need to. He just built something so substantial, so enduring, so impossible to ignore, that it made Kellerman's entire philosophy look foolish. Every Malpaso film was evidence. Every directing credit was testimony. Every award was a verdict. The dangerous crossing turned out to lead somewhere extraordinary. The Bad Step was actually the first step toward becoming one of the most powerful filmmakers in Hollywood history. And it started with standing up in the middle of a sentence, walking out of a room where people were trying to define his limits and proving through years of patient work that the only limits that matter are the ones you accept. Warner Brothers eventually came back to Clint, but on his terms. The studio that had told him to follow orders learned to follow his lead. The institution that had tried to contain him became dependent on his participation. The system that was supposed to be eternal adapted to accommodate a man who'd simply refused to comply with it. David Kellerman spent his final years in the industry watching all of this unfold. Every headline about Clint's latest project. Every award ceremony where Clint was honored. Every retrospective celebrating his career. Constant reminders of the opportunity that had sat across a conference room table, waiting to be partnered with rather than managed. That's the thing about telling people what they can't do. Sometimes they listen. Sometimes they leave and build proof that you were wrong. And sometimes that proof becomes their legacy, while your certainty becomes your epitaph. The irony of David Kellerman's downfall extended beyond his own career. The philosophy he represented, the rigid hierarchy that kept talent contained and executives supreme, began crumbling across Hollywood in the years following Clint's departure. Other actors watched what Malpaso accomplished. They saw a blueprint for independence that nobody had drawn before. Robert Redford launched Sundance. Warren Beatty started demanding producer credits. Barbra Streisand insisted on directing her own projects. The door Clint kicked open in 1968 became a highway that dozens of performers walked through in subsequent decades. Every actor who now runs a production company, every star who demands creative control, every performer who refuses to simply follow orders owes something to the precedent Clint established when he stood up from that mahogany table. Kellerman lived long enough to see the entire system he'd defended become obsolete. The studio model that treated actors as interchangeable commodities collapsed under the weight of talent who understood their own value. The executives who'd nodded along while Kellerman lectured Clint about knowing his place found themselves answering to the very performers they'd once dismissed. Clint never spoke publicly about Kellerman's decline, never gloated, never mentioned the threats that had been hurled at his back as he walked out. He simply kept working, kept building, kept proving through accumulated achievement that creative vision belonged to creators, not gatekeepers. In his 90s, Clint was still directing films, still producing through Malpaso, still maintaining the independence he'd claimed in that conference room more than 50 years earlier. The dangerous crossing had led to a destination that exceeded anything he could have imagined when he first stood up and walked toward the door. And somewhere in Hollywood's collective memory, David Kellerman remained frozen in that moment, hand outstretched toward a contract that would never be signed, watching the future of cinema walk away because he couldn't imagine an actor becoming anything more than what the system permitted. That's the real lesson. Not that Clint proved Kellerman wrong. That Clint proved limits only exist when you accept them as real. If this story showed you why walking away from people who underestimate you is sometimes the first step toward greatness, subscribe and share it with someone building their own path. What ceiling have you broken through? Tell me in the comments.